Well, thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you very much as well to, or in particular to Carlin, who actually brought me here. I have to start with some correction between the new normal and the ongoing, the continuity of the old system. Actually, I'm currently not from Ireland, but I'm coming from Italy, where I work since about 2 or 3 years, which is part of the new normal, I think, that we have to consider, because what is happening actually is that the old traditional system of people working their lifetime in one nation state is over. The new normal is people kind of floating around from ordinary blue-collar workers to people in academic positions or in political advisory bodies. So what I want to look at is at different schools or different approaches. The first being the regulationist school, which is very much a political economic approach, looking at the shifts of property structures in terms of accumulation regimes. The second is from the 1920s, I think, in Russia, the discussion on Bolshevik cycles, on major cycles, in the technological development, inducing major shifts, major changes in the economic structure, again in the accumulation systems. A third reference is to what you may know, since Elinor Ostrom had been laureate of the Nobel Prize, the reinvention, if you want, the revitalization of commons. And another thing is that we are talking about a social treaty, which is a major development when it comes to social policy. There is a frequent discussion on this, that we need a new social contract, a new treaty. Welfare institutions fulfill certain functions, such as macroeconomic stabilization, labor market integration, social insurance, poverty alleviation, and social service provision. But it is political contestation of these functions that in part drives policy changes in times of a fundamental social and economic restructuration. We see this actually in Europe, in the European Union, exactly today, where the Greek people are called for a referendum, where the decision will be, what do we actually want, where do we want to go in terms of these welfare functions? Is the state or is the political institutional system geared to something that is economic growth, or is there a wider understanding of what social policy or what societal policy actually is about? The previous speaker made us aware of this, the importance to rethink fundamentally, more or less fundamentally, the entire social policy framework. Looking at social policy in a very general term, we have different, and I think 3 major features, 3 major points of reference. That's the one thing, the fundamental decision or coordination between what I call the accumulation regime and a regulatory welfare system. This is very much setting up, basically, a system of welfare, of social policy. And then we have a kind of fine-tuning that looks at the regulatory system in terms of institutional adaptation and in terms of the contemporary economic situation. If we have growth, if we have slowdown in growth, whatsoever. But there is this path dependency always, which led then to the discussion of Richard Titmuss, Wilensky in the 60s, 50s, 60s, then later, much later, by Esping Andersen, which I think is much overrated. Carlin and Raymond Chen used different terms for this. I think it is very much applicable. The redistributive system the developmental system, and the productivist system. We can locate them within this figure and look at where we are actually standing. In general, our current system is based on about 4 major pillars. The one, it's 2 organizational forms. It's the market and the state. These are the main regulators of the entire societal system. 2 types of goods. It's private and public goods. These are decisive moments that are actually shaping not just society in reality, but as well our mindset when it comes to thinking about social policy, about economic policies, and others. And then we have, funnily, only one agent. Funnily, because economists, and I am an economist as well, had been for a long time very well equipped to ignore this thing. We only think about one actor. That's the completely rational individual actor. There is nothing outside of this. For a long time, this had been what we had been teaching, what we are still teaching. You mentioned Stiglitz, Krugman would be another, they would oppose it. But this was the one rational actor. No emotions, no history, no irrational behavior, no collectivity. Then we have a 4th thing, that's 2 regulators. The one is the invisible hand, we know it from Adam Smith, and the other is the moral sentiment. When things go too bad, we have to think about values, we have to think about we should be good to each other. Now, the institutional constitution I mentioned, this is the first step when it came to developing modern social policy. Much later, but this applied then as well in the middle of the 1800s in the European Union, the reference had been mentioned by Beveridge, 5 giant evils: squalor, ignorance, want, idleness, and disease. These had been main reference points already then for social policy making. The recipe had been social insurance and welfare programs. Social insurance based on the idea of factory work and of the nation state. And with this, on bureaucracy, and at the end, you have had this moral control of what had been called Armenfürsorge, or what had been called welfare systems in the different contexts. These had been the main pillars on which the system had been developed and worked pretty well, actually, until one can contest this now, let's say at least until the 1920s. Now, from that time on, we had to kind of make a major shift and adapt the system. Because, of course, factory work, the nation state, all this came under threat after 1718, with the revolution in Russia, with a new concept of competition, of systems, and with something we know, especially from Mr. Ford, as welfare politician, if you want, or social politician. He said, what people need is a good income to be able to pay for my products. I don't want to produce cars and won't be able to sell them. So this was a major shift in the framework where actually the institutional adaptation took place. It was away from the old concepts of social insurance, and it was a shift towards actually very much as well a productivist system of social policy. Now the picture goes back much, I don't know actually from when the Nuremberg Trichte, as it had been called, put knowledge into the workers' head and they will function. The modern version was showing up yesterday in one slide, Charlie Chaplin's Modern Time. Everything is geared toward increasing the ability of the workforce to function within the system. I remember this one very funny system, which is actually not funny, that even eating was automated as a process and the people could work while they had been eating. They had been not eating, but they had been made eating by the machine. All this is working for a long time, but then there is a crisis. The one major crisis had been in the end of the 1920s, where the entire economy based on this, on a global level, broke down. Now, this is a major problem, of course, for the entire system, and it had been necessary to try finding ways of balancing the institutional system of what we had with the economic possibilities. And this is what we talk about today again. We talk about it, but I think it's a wrong orientation. I mentioned Greece. This is the decision that is, the Greek people are kind of forced by the European or by the institutions, or they are called now. We don't have the means, so we have to change our social policy system. Austerity is the solution. The European Commission, with a communication on towards social investment for growth and cohesion, including implementing the European Social Funds 2014 to 2020, is kind of showing the pathway of the entire system of what is called now social investment strategy. Actually, preparing is, I was not really aware that it's only for such a short time. I worked in the Brussels context for a long time, and we had been talking about similar things for a much longer time. But this is a very recent development. If we look at it, the idea is not investing in a social development by way of investing in what you may call quality of life or well-being or something like this. It is not about investing in people as, I may refer to Timothy in terms of human rights, as generic rights, but it is, again, a productivist orientation. Preventing from disabilities and rehabilitation on the one hand, improvements in the quality of care staff on the other hand. I do not want to deny that these are important issues, but I think the priority of this is hugely problematic. You find this orientation, I quoted this because it's such a nice quote, if you want, underlining really this orientation. You find this orientation in other areas as well. Early childhood, I mentioned, early childhood education and care. Family benefits, parenting services, all in the spirit of investing in the functionality of people. Child care, long-term care and social investment, maternal, paternal, parental leave schemes, and unemployment benefits, minimum income, active labor market policy, and social services. As I said, there's nothing completely wrong with it. We need more investment in these areas. But we have to consider where is it going and where is the priority. The priority is shown if you look at the recent, more or less recent, evaluation of what is going on. Key areas with negative outcomes are those where actually the social, in a wider understanding, the rights approach is standing in is the focused one, and where it is not immediately relevant for maintaining the workforce. You can see the shortcuts. Sorry, I didn't apply the different or provide the different country codes here. But the major thing, the major statement is the European member states are happy to go for social investment under two conditions. If they have the money and if they get it from Brussels. This is the European reality. They are not interested in developing a common strategy based on human rights for a new normal, but they are interested in maintaining the old orientation in terms of a nation-state policy that is, at the end, resulting in this. It's not only Greece, it's Spain, it's Portugal, it's Italy, it's actually as well the rich countries like Germany or France or the UK. You mentioned a huge difference of 16 years, I think, in life expectancies. And if they manage these 16 years at least to survive up to 55, they may actually end up at the soup kitchen getting their food from there. I need a job is a different thing than it is you have to work for nothing. So I think the new normal is coming back now to the fundamental question of change. We have a new economic order that includes the limitation of being able to export whatever we have. We cannot export debt forever. Greek collapses, other countries should have collapsed. They managed actually to shift the burden on the shoulders of their own population, or they managed to shift the burden on countries outside of their own constituency. The difference is that we find, on the one hand, with the social investment strategy, indeed a shift from the productivist orientation towards a more complex understanding of what the worker actually is. It's not just feed some education in it and he will or she will perform better. It's a more complex understanding of human needs. But there is something more we have to consider now. And the shift here is, I think, that we have to consider a more complex development in terms of the entire societal structure. I mentioned Elinor Ostrom before. She's wrote something on the needs, the development of complex human systems. It's about common pool resources. We are not simply producing public goods with social provisions, but we are producing something completely different in terms of new societies. This is not something we want to do or we should do or by way of providing a moral order or normative framework, but it is something that is actually developing in different niches, in small spaces, but it is happening in reality. So I want to go back to the five giant. It's okay. To the five giant evils, but kind of reinterpret them as term of five giant tensions. Some of them had been mentioned. The overproduction of goods and the turn of goods into bads. We are producing not use values, but we are producing exchange values as soon as we throw them away, as better it is with the entire growth orientation. This applies as well to some extent to green growth. The next tension, giant tension, I think, is societal abundance versus inequality of access. Bill Gates had been mentioned, Bill and Melinda, they are very generous spending their money. You can mention others like Soros. The resources are there, but the question is, they are privately owned, privately controlled, but not accessible to nation states, let alone for a global order. Next one, abundance of knowledge and its misdirection towards skills. We have knowledge. We are producing new knowledge. We are distributing knowledge. But when it comes to the effective political process, I said I worked in Brussels for some time, we don't find the acknowledgement of this. It's reduced on skills. The next one, individualization of problems and the emergences of a societal threat. This is as well what happens today. We still individualize problems that are actually problems of our entire societies. And the last one, I don't know how to show it again here, is the one of the complexity of government and limited scope of governance. This came up in different contributions here as well. We have to deal with the fact that the traditional nation-state based orientation on government doesn't work anymore. It's a power question indeed, and with this it's normative orientation, but it is as well much more. It is about societies that are not simply inclusive, but that are produced by the people. I come back to the European question, and it is really a European question, not the question of Greece today. The question is Europe, and you can apply this as well globally, are we ready to change our economic thinking from a simply growth-oriented major orientation towards an orientation that acknowledges the real cost and the real benefits for what we pay? Thank you very much for your attention.
对这个社会政策的这个讲解那么这样的一个呢，就是下面